Welcome to the Everything Compliance Women's Edition, which is a co-production of the Great Women in Compliance podcast. I could not be more excited to get to host this group of fabulous women with fabulous content. You're going to have a fabulous time here. I am here with Hema Lomax, with Karen Moore, and Lisa Fine. We are discussing everything compliance, and I can't wait to start. Karen, why don't you start us off? What do you want to talk about?
Well, I'm going to talk about something that's a bit of a downer, but so important, which is modern slavery and human trafficking. I would like to say it's an emerging risk, but it is not. It is a long-standing risk. Those of us who were at SCCE in September and attended Matt Friedman's excellent but deeply disturbing talk could have come away without asking themselves, what more can I do personally, organizationally, globally? What more can my company do? Matt heads up a nonprofit, the Making Club, which is one of many valiant organizations that exist to combat modern slavery and human trafficking around the world. He presented in disturbing, sometimes I have to close my eyes for some of the images, detail how some of these schemes work. And he presented truly sobering statistics, including an extrapolated rate of exploitation of women, of children, of men, as one every 4 seconds, or 9.2 million a year. 9.2 million people a year entering into modern slavery or human trafficking. It's not a new topic. Kudos to a lot of companies and industries that have worked really hard for a long time, where it's been front of mind, it's been up there on their risks, especially those involved in agriculture sector, the so-called fast fashion industry, mining, areas where these issues are kind of front of mind and frankly hard to ignore. But it probably lurks in pretty much every organization. You just don't think about it. You think that, oh, we're a services company. How could slavery and trafficking impact us? Or we're wholly in the US. We don't even deal internationally, so it's not a US issue. And we're pretty much all wrong. So the question is, what about your supply chain? How much do you know? And have we done enough to identify it and address it? And compliance is such a wonderful opportunity to surface and highlight this really important risk area, even if it's a risk that lurks more in procurement or in operations or in HR. Compliance is really well positioned to identify, elevate it, escalate it, and act. It also should frankly feature heavily in any ESG program that companies are putting forward. ESG tends to focus on environment, maybe on governance, tends to think of privacy as the big S in there, but we have to remember this too. In good conscience, as compliance officers, I feel like we've got a moral duty and a professional duty to elevate and escalate. If it's not enough of a reason, the moral ethical impetus, think of our stakeholders and our shareholders who are starting to ask tough questions, and it would be really nice to have good answers. There's tons of guidance out there. The International Labor Organization's Declaration on Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work contains really good guidance on what could be expected. OECD similarly has good guidelines for multinational enterprises that includes this area, UN guiding principles on business and human rights, and organizations like the Making Club that can help with resources, guidance, baseline assessments. I mean, there's no excuse, I guess, for closing your eyes and saying, I can't find enough. There's also a growing body of regulatory requirements. We do see a lot of that coming out of Europe. It's been a very human rights driven agenda for quite a while. So that would include things like the UK Modern Slavery Act and the EU Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which is hitting a lot of companies now or soon, which has demand. So it's a complex issue. It's not easy to identify in your supply chain. It can be subtle. It can even be insidious. But I'd like to talk to a recent case, or a case that recently came to light, I guess, in the UK, which involves McDonald's and also some high profile UK grocery chains, including some of my favorites like Marks and Spencer. And I think this really highlights that even a kind of small issue can throw up red flags. Even a small issue is one where we might think, oh, they should have realized, but how, I think also listen to the facts and be open-minded and realistic about how much really would your company have done in similar situations? So let's talk about these 16 Czech nationals who were forced into working at a McDonald's branch and also at a commercial bakery that supplied bread to major supermarkets, including Marks and Spencer and Tesco. Those were own brands, so the company had kind of oversight into production. So over a 4-year period, victims were forced to work at a McDonald's branch. Others worked 9 years in this commercial bakery. Their wages were paid into accounts controlled by this trafficking ring, and the victims just given a few pounds a day in substandard accommodations to live in. The exploitation actually ended in 2019 after the victims finally alerted the Czech police, but with COVID, it's only now made its way through the court system. So BBC is the one that kind of highlighted this case just about a month ago, and they published a report. There were a lot of red flags. The McDonald's branch employed the victims directly. The supermarket, which had a direct supply chain linked with its own brand. And the red flags included things like the fact that these wages were being paid into one account. That should have already been surfaced through their fiscal compliance programs, and these accounts were in other people's names. So that the wages were being paid several wages into one account, and those accounts weren't even owned by the person that was working for the enterprise. The victims didn't speak English, which you can kind of understand in these hourly wage. The language may not be an issue, but the forms were all completed by this trafficking ring. And a ring member was able to attend the interviews as an interpreter, controlling the passports and other documents of those employees. So again, something that maybe should have been caught or at least raised some suspicions. There was excessive overtime worked by all the victims on a regular basis. Again, question, should that be tracked and send up a red flags? And then multiple employees had the same registered address. 9 of them working in the bakery had the same address. Again, independently and even taken together, I question how many organizations would have highlighted these red flags, surfaced them, and linked them all together to highlight the problem. So I just want to make sure that we're not kind of being overly judgy here, but I think it's a really learning opportunity. Can any of us say that we've got systems in place that would have identified these and linked them? McDonald's is a franchise operation. They've got a lot of processes globally, but they're being implemented locally. So you question where the quality control is there. Since this and also other inputs, McDonald's has beefed up an already extensive program to address modern slavery in its stores and in its supply chain, including what looks familiar to any compliance program. If you go onto their website, they've got policies, employment practices, training, speak up channels, supplier code and assessment, and audit. They're trying to do the right thing. The supermarkets had direct influence over supply. They should have been particularly vigilant on controls, given that their own brand was being placed on the packaging. So they were really caught up reputationally as well. But question, would their controls have caught this? To their credit, many of them did stop working with the bakery, but only after the police investigation commenced in 2019. There were some interesting facts there. Marks and Spencer did indicate it stopped working the company in 2020 after they became aware of the breaches of ethical labor standards via their helpline. So I don't know where the disconnect between the police investigation and their own helpline. Tesco and Waitrose both stopped working with the factory in 2020 and 2021, respectively, after audits revealed concerning working practices and concerns about factory standards and work conditions. So audit there did eventually kind of catch some of these issues, and 2 other companies did inspections but didn't catch any issues. It's not always easy to show up, especially if you've got a booked or a previously announced visit to the factory. And in any event, they focus more on food safety rather than employment practices. The co-op did make a number of unannounced inspections, including worker interviews, but they found no signs of modern slavery, really hard for people to pick up. So the bakery itself went out of business in 2022, and its former director stated that the company had done everything by the book, didn't break any laws, but that their HR department would have been the ones responsible to tackle any issues in any event. So not me, not it. It must have been that bad HR department. So that was kind of distressing. McDonald's, as I said, it really has beefed up a lot, not just because of this case, and Marks and Spencer, again, my favorite store, still in existence. Also, really leaving this topic with everybody and putting it all on your desks. What can be done is company specific. Being better educated on the issue, I think, is a start. It really opened my eyes. Just that one presentation in Texas really caused me to start investigating a little bit more thoroughly, overcoming that knee-jerk reaction that this is not relevant, it couldn't happen in my organization. And then our excellent compliance programs kick in. Identifying the risks, evaluating it becomes the first order of business. We've got risk assessment already in place. Controlling it may mean multiple adjustments to process, contracts, audit, use of tech applications, including AI, to try and link those pieces of data together and shoot up a bigger red flag, other guidance and more. Matt Friedman showed us really briefly in Texas, the Mekong Club has developed this app, which I thought was a simply brilliant, simple tool. Even if you have an announced audit, you take this app, you go out onto the factory floor and you start asking workers. They point to the flag of their country. It starts to pop up a bunch of questions in their native language. Do you have access to your passport? Are you being paid a fair wage? Are you working this many hours or this many hours? To start giving the audit people on the floor a little bit of a flavor. So it's a good spot check. It seems like really easy. So complicated issue, really important issue, may not always immediately address the bottom line, but I think it's a really top of mind issue for compliance officers to honestly evaluate whatever actions you undertake. I think it's do more and do better.
Karen, I love all the things you said. This is definitely one of my at heart topics that we talk about frequently on Two Gurus Talk Compliance. I think there's a couple of things. First of all, there's a really neat technology that I've come across recently where they can send text messages to workers in fields that don't have access to apps or don't have access to smartphones, and they can respond to surveys about how they're doing, if they're okay, with phone numbers and things like that, so that we're trying to get to people on the ground and have them have access to this information, even if they aren't in the smartphone world. One of our clients is using that with its suppliers. So it's a huge company. It has a lot of power to do that, but they're workers on the ground, and then they go and they check to make sure that they all have these phone numbers and access to them. So we're getting better, I think, with technology, and that's really exciting, but we definitely can do better and need to as an organization. And the next thing I'll say is there's a lot of really interesting things that are frightening me in China, obviously. But one of the most interesting ones is that the U.S. Bipartisan Committee on China have recently been concerned with the fact that or the accusation, I suppose, that China is moving some of the Uyghur people out of Uyghur and putting them in forced labor other places. And I really worry about that for some of our clients, especially that if suddenly China is under bans or whole areas of China that continue to get bigger, that's going to be really challenging. And I think not enough compliance officers are aware of the EU forced labor ban that is coming in probably 2027. 2 out of the 3 European bodies have approved it. The last one that approved it, which I think was the Parliament, was 555 to 6. So it's not exactly controversial. This thing's going to pass, and it's going to be a regulation, which I think is going to make a huge difference and be exciting, because the more products we ban with this and the more we're forcing people to look at it from a commercial perspective, the more successful I think we can be. So
yes, and 100%, Christy, thank you for mentioning that ban, because that and the CSDDD, people should be aware, has extraterritorial effect, right? So it's not I don't work in Europe kind of, I don't need to deal with it.
I love that. Lisa, what did you have to say about this?
Yeah, I have a little bit of a different thought about it, starting with the fact that Matt Friedman's speech at SCCE really was super significant to me and life-changing. I think about it all the time. I see people washing windows. I think, wait a minute, is this okay? And other things. So it's something that really should be permeating everything that we do as ethics and compliance officers, because really we are about that. And this is a gap. But my other point that I think about putting on my former US HR compliance hat is where you have a lot of people coming in, and for example, for an I-9, even with legitimate, with the exception of Puerto Rico, you are supposed to fill them out in English with Spanish as a tool, or if people are living together. And you have organizations saying, we don't want to be said that we're discriminating against people. So as you were talking, Karen, I was thinking, how do we walk that line? Here in the US, especially, my last role had a lot of people working in airline kitchens. A lot of people, English not the first language. It was amazing, 20, 30 languages spoken somewhere. How do you handle that? And I do think that one of the things that's really the most important is actually looking at where the money is going, because it's one thing if people live together or help each other with a language. I mean, you might be able to, you should further delve into that. But if they're also, everything's going in the same direction, I really think that the financial controls that a company is using for fraud or AP or other things, we should really be thinking about how to look at that as well, because that to me seems like one other really practical and logical way to also be looking through it. So that's what I kept thinking about. Where is that line where someone says, I moved here and I'm living with a bunch of friends and we're working together.
Yeah.
And how do we make sure that isn't an exploitative situation? So that was my thought while you were speaking.
I love that perspective. It's very compelling, and I appreciate you adding that from your previous world, right? But what do you have to say about this?
Yeah, just, oh gosh, so much stuff on that. It's very compelling, very moving. And Karen, I appreciated you setting out some of the practical things that companies ought to be doing by way of compliance when it comes to slavery, modern slavery, human trafficking. I also think Lisa's right. We have to be very thoughtful about the balance. With US sanctions law and the EU laws coming, there can be a very disproportionate impact on some of these jurisdictions. And so what can we do about that? It's a really good question, Lisa. One thing I wanted just to highlight is this conventional wisdom in the human trafficking industry, the human trafficking, let's say, experts that are trying to fight this, that we should not just walk away, we should try to help. And so some of these global multinationals have really good positional power, really good leverage. And if they've done what Karen said and had effective ways to detect these problems in their supply chains, they have two options: walk away and exclaim that they're walking away, or also stay and figure out how you can help eradicate that and remove that. And Christy, you mentioned the movement, right? If it's whack-a-mole, if it pops up in one place and it's caught, it just moves somewhere else under a different name, and it's very easy to create a different entity and keep on going, keep moving forward. So that industry, as Matt Friedman said, is powerful. The criminal industry is powerful, and we need something that's an antidote to that. So Lisa, it's not a specific answer to your question, but there is a sense that we can do what we think is a good faith narrative of not just detecting, but preventing. And preventing, for me, when it comes to positional power, is looking to see what you can do. What can you do with your dollars to ensure that doesn't have to happen anymore? What's happening there that you could maybe help to eradicate? Now, that seems lofty and idealistic, but if we don't ask those hard questions, we're not going to come up with those answers. So I'll leave it with that, just to say, I think there's more to the conundrum. It's difficult. One last thing he did say was it takes 21 days worth of potato chips. He said that what would be needed in terms of resources to fight the current problem is the cost of 21 days of potato chips consumed in the US. So that should tell you it doesn't take that much, relatively speaking, to fight this in terms of Matt's view. So what do we do with those funds, and how do we fight it would be my question.
Yeah, some of it I think is shining lights into dark corners and then using purchasing power. I'm going to identify this and then I'm not going to support it. That alone would make a giant step forward.
Okay. Yeah, I feel you. I'm in a hotel right now in New York City, and every time I walk by one of the cleaners, I want to say, "Are you okay? Are you doing all right?" That would annoy them very quickly. But I really do have that. What's that sensitivity there? Lisa said it's everywhere. It's almost impossible to let go of. All right, let's switch topics. Hema, what'd you bring to us today?
Yes, I'm going to switch topics. I want to talk about the dozens of employees in the US that work at Ernst & Young, the Big Four auditor, that were fired recently. You may be aware that they were fired, and the reason given was that they were, I don't know if you want to call it multitasking or cheating. We're going to see where you land on this story. But let's say they were looking at their compliance training on multiple monitors at the same time. Now, this was in the context of a training week, a professional development week, where these auditors could get their CPD, CEUs, their required credits for maintaining their professional certifications. Also, not insignificantly, EY required them to certify that they were taking these trainings, these hours. And those of us that are listening that have done this work, it's a serious business, right? When we do our CEUs as lawyers, we have to click that we're present every 7 minutes, I think, and some of them every 3. So certainly a well-known requirement when it comes to the profession. So let's have a conversation really about who could be right and wrong here. I'm not going to take any sides, but I'm going to set out the opportunities for both of those arguments. So let's talk about the employees for a second. There's a lot of pushback as to whether they should have been fired. And I think we should remember who they are, right? They are gatekeepers. They are auditors. The auditors are there to help us with the integrity of the financial system, of the corporate world. And so much like attorneys, judges, police officers, they have a public duty to have integrity in everything they do. That's one position you could take. And certainly in terms of whether or not they knew, there's claims that they were warned that they should be not taking these things at the same time. So certainly we want to think about good enforcement of the policies. I want to give EY some credit here that they put a policy out there and then they enforced it. They put their money where their mouth is. On the flip side, EY have been accused of a number of things here. They've been accused of being exaggerated. Perhaps the quality of the training wasn't so good that the employees thought it was a checkbox exercise. We could ask about the culture in terms of the culture of the company. We saw EY, and not to pick on EY, but they had an issue with a suicide in India recently this year, where they were accused of overworking their teams and having a culture of multitasking. And so certainly some of the pushback from the employees and those supporters have been, you expect us to multitask, you expect us to bill hours, you don't make extra time for this. What did you expect us to do? So I think there's a couple of sides there. I think I also want to talk about the compliance team themselves, right? The compliance team would have decided, or maybe the HR team would have decided what the content was and what the training was. And we all have a responsibility as compliance officers to make sure that we are making content fit for purpose. This is challenging. One size fits all is very difficult, but we certainly need to think about the negative perceptions we sometimes has as compliance officers, where we're really checking a box and we're not really thinking about what's relevant to the particular employee. So certainly an opportunity there as well for the compliance officers. Now I want to share a little bit more context with EY. EY was one of the big four that was also fined this year, and I think maybe even in prior years, for exam cheating. So we had auditors cheating on their exams. Now I deliver that as context because you can see why the team at EY may have been a bit sensitive to the public perception and the regulator perception that they didn't care enough. They were willfully blind to this type of behaviour on the part of their auditors. And indeed, it's not just EY. KPMG was fined this year. I think it was hundreds of millions. It was a big fine. I don't have the detail there. And so we need to really think about the bigger context here. I've given context when it comes to the exam cheating. I've also given context when it comes to the culture at the big four. And I wanted to share this case because it really is a conundrum we often are faced with as corporate compliance executives. What are we doing that might inadvertently be creating the conditions where cheating would be the first choice? What are we doing where we are creating difficult conditions for employees where they might decide multitasking is their only option? And in fact, worse, as has been suggested, that they've been encouraged to multitask and do this. So it's certainly a question I think we always have to grapple with. At the same time, what about the enforcement of the policies? Are they simply checkbox? Or are we trying to do something relevant here? So I think that's a really good conundrum for us to be thinking about. I'd love your thoughts. Karen, would you like to say a thought on that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And I think we've got, like, all of us grapple with training and how training can be most effective. And I'll first start with the fact that e-learning really shouldn't be the be all and end all of training, especially on important topics for gatekeepers. That's one question. When I started in one job and I sat down with my training director, she expressed a lot of frustration. Why aren't people completing their training on time? Why do we have to chase after them? Why aren't they paying better attention? How can we make it tougher on them to just multitask like this? And I said, first of all, we're using a lot of man hours for this training. So it's a burden on us to identify what does this person need, or as close to this person as possible, this group of people, to the smallest reasonable group of people, to get them the training that they need to be relevant to their job. We have to make sure that the company, not the compliance department, but that business is sending the message that this training is important and I have expectations about it. And then third of all, I'll be really interested, Christy, Lisa, and you, Hema, too, because I think that to hear your opinions, but one thing that we instituted in my last job was a test down or test out at the beginning to say, look, here's some really tough questions. If you can answer them because you know this topic so well, go for it. You don't have to take the rest of the training. We found that the questions were tough, that a lot of people didn't pass, so they had to take the training, but also took about the same amount of time as the training itself. So it was just a kind of a double bluff, really, to get people to think about the issues and spend the time at least for that amount. So that's all of mine. The one actual last thought, because the class that I teach, the students were really grappling with this topic. We were talking about big things start small, and the recent Meta firing of employees for just using meal vouchers for personal items. And I have to say, you take the culture into account, but if people are cheating, they're cheating. I think that you got to take that seriously. There's got to be a message sent there as well.
Yeah. Okay, Karen, I'll follow on, and one of your last points was one of the main points I was going to raise that we have started doing is the pre-test option. Now it's a challenge because in a varied workforce, what is actually too hard or too simple can be a challenge. But the part that I thought was really interesting doing this the first time, and we had good feedback and decent pass rates, but also the people who tried to multitask regardless were the ones who failed. And then they had to do the course. We wanted to not have the course necessarily be considered like punishment, but if you know this and you're doing this, this is good. And I'm talking about code training because that is for everybody. So it's hard in some ways to generalize, but isn't in the other. But the other way to do it is, like you're saying, we need to make sure people are getting the training they need. And that is a problem sometimes, and with an off the shelf or another training, there's nothing that will get some of our people more irritated than getting a training that's about some crazy pharma case. For those who don't know, I work in education, publishing, and technology. And to them, it's like we took a shortcut. So why shouldn't they? So I think it's important to kind of balance. There are certain things you can do that more with. Phishing is phishing for data security. People, everyone's getting similar emails from banks, but you really want to fake banks, let me clarify. But I think it's really important to do those things that aren't just subject matter fit, but also in terms of I'm a big fan now of the pre-test in some of these situations like that, especially when you throw in an all of the above when it doesn't count, because so many people assume that answer to any compliance question is going to be all of the above. Everyone's like, I got caught. I assumed it was all of the above. I'm like, that's why I have to, now you did the training. And they weren't even upset because they were like, we had a chance to get through it. And I think that it's a practical and easy approach. So with that, Christy, I'll turn it over to you. Who does these things regularly for a living?
I do. We customize training all day long. That's just part of what we do. Big Four has a problem. Let's be really honest. Big Four has a problem. They're interchangeably, I think it was Norway, or they had hundreds of them giving each other test answers. In South Africa, I can't remember if it's KPMG or Deloitte, one of the two, they ended up being fined for participating in bribery with the government. I mean, these are not good things, right? And it's rampant. And I know that there are giant companies, right? I think Deloitte has 450,000 employees or something. So trying to say that Deloitte as a whole is a terrible place is inaccurate. But we have a culture issue where I think most recently one of the regulators is trying to impose a monitor on the boards of these 4 companies because they don't trust them. These are supposed to be auditors giving us trust in public companies, right? So we have a real problem. And from this perspective, I want to applaud EY for taking something that is a public response. And I think that's important, because when you have an industry that's broken, like when the FCPA went through the defense industry, or when we have these modern slavery raids in apparel, which I think are going to be happening more and more, you need to clean it up from the inside. And so I think that taking a public stand, even if you're getting heat for it, is beneficial. Hema, why don't we give you the last word on this? What do you think?
Oh, thank you. No, I think you've all covered some of the points I wanted to raise, but one of the things that occurred to me as you were talking, and Karen, you mentioned the piece about the perks at Meta. I wanted to reiterate that this week of training was actually a perk at EY as well, because EY was providing the required CPD training for its employees without them having to go out and pay for it separately at some conference or whatever. But I wanted to just underscore one last thing. I talked about various parties that might be responsible. We didn't talk about the regulator of the auditors. So the licensing certification boards and some of the advice you've given testing out, that's not available to auditors or professionals in that context. So it's a good point you all make. And I want to make sure that we think about maybe we should be reimagining certifications and the requirements that are needed, because we have accepted for decades that what you do is you take a test at some point and then you keep a certification by doing some paid courses. The regulators are good. They don't tell you what to do, but it then feels very remote, right? They're like, just check the box to get this many credits per year. And so I think there's an opportunity there also for the regulating bodies, the certification bodies, whether it's for lawyers or auditors, because we know that the regulators, the SEC, the DOJ, are going to be focusing on the regulators, the guardians, the gatekeepers as well, right? They're going to be interested in what role did the guardians play. And Christy, I heard you and Tom talking about a case in Texas with Deloitte, where they were asked questions about why they didn't do due diligence on a particular deal. It's very important, where fraud was found. There was actually criminal convictions involved if you'd done the due diligence. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, when Deloitte representative, when asked about that, they said, now I know what I'm looking for. I guess it would be easy to find. Yes, mind-blowing, not trying to pick on that specific individual, the lack of responsibility and accountability there is crazy. But again, we've got to think about the role that these auditors are playing. Big deals are being done relying on the work they're doing. So I think the certifying bodies, together with the compliance teams, really need to really think about the role of these gatekeepers in the profession and make sure, to your point, Lisa, Karen, that the content is fit for purpose and it's actually helping that Deloitte partner not to not know that looking for criminal convictions was relevant when it came to the due diligence.
I love it. But there are much more homegrown, tiny issues that are going on here, okay? Especially when we've got Copilot in all of these computers. Mine was auto-installed. And what is this thing, right? What are we doing with these AI assistants? I'm going to start there. Basically, if you've seen them, they transcribe your meeting, they take notes, they summarize conversations, they make talking points for you, which can take a lot of time, right? But this Washington Post article opens with the case of a man called Alex Bilzerian. He was on a Zoom meeting with some venture capital investors, and afterward, he got an automated email from Otter AI, which is one of the transcription services. It contained the transcript of the meeting, including the parts after he logged off, when the investors discussed the firm's strategic failures and how they cooked their metrics. That deal fell apart. Many AI assistants basically have a default setting that send email transcripts to everyone in the meeting. That includes sections from before or after they leave. Another story involved a person who received a transcript, including that their coworkers talking smack about them after they left, which is always awesome. That person actually didn't say anything because they were too embarrassed to go up and say, "What the heck, man? What were you talking about me and why do I know it?" Okay. As you might imagine, these services correctly stress that organizations have to check the settings of the transcription and the summarizing services. They can be customized so people only get the summaries of the part of the meetings they attend, right? Another issue that they found is this automatic recording. So I have been on so many of these meetings where it just starts recording. Okay, sure. One executive's recording was of a meeting and their default setting was to send meeting recordings to a public server. But it was the CEO, and the purpose of the meeting was to decide who was getting laid off. So slightly awkward that everyone could access that. You can imagine how quickly everyone started accessing that as soon as it was up there. And it doesn't even begin to touch privacy and consent. So obviously, for a lot of American companies, it's not something that we consider, but we should. And so I was on a call. It was HubSpot, Salesforce, one of these kind of companies. And their person that I got on the phone immediately started recording. And I said, recording and AI transcripts. And I said, "Can you please turn them off?" And he looked at me like I was insane. And then he said, "No." And I said, "What do you mean no?" He said, "I don't know how to." I said, "We're about to discuss my sales strategy and marketing and how we set up our pipelines. And these are not things that I want in a recording I can't control and have no idea where it's going." So he got really mad and I just hung up basically. And I thought, this is so stupid. I went with another service because we need to have some sort of control, at least ourselves, in this. The SEC conference in Chicago, my coworker Ellen heard the story of someone at a company had asked Copilot to go find all the information of a whistleblower. And it came back with interview notes and documentation for the investigation and all kinds of stuff to people who shouldn't have it. And that's a settings issue too. So I think that there's a twofold problem with that specifically. And first is that people have to be meticulously given the right permission to access only the type of documents they're supposed to have. You've got a huge company, you need really strong employee classification in order to do that. Most companies don't. And the second is the need for records to be properly documented with levels of access control and levels of confidentiality. How often is that happening for everything? right? So you need this double layer to protect things like this. It's possible, but most people don't. And so the article basically finished with saying that the executives get so excited about the time-saving elements of AI, especially when it comes to things like reporting, being able to make statistical responses to sales calls, how many are you closing, why aren't you closing, and we look at them. I'm not saying there's no value in this. What I'm saying is it's kind of insane. And the last thing that I would say is that people don't realize they're making corporate records that are discoverable. And so in their Slack messages, in their gifts and their pictures they're sending on Teams, like those are corporate records that are discoverable. Think first, do you want this in front of a judge or a public forum before you start writing it? So with all of that, I think these are very kind of banal examples, but they're so damaging to a company that we can't just have them out there. And I think we and compliance need to be talking about the risks, not in this apocalyptic way, but in the, how would you like your entire Slack chat put forward to the whole company? How would you like this AI assistant to copy what you're saying? And we really need to make this all apparent. So who are we going to start with? Hannah, you're looking like you want to talk.
Yeah.
Let's talk to you.
You've hit a fantastic topic. I mean, look, the future is here, right? This idea that we could hide behind our Slack messages or hide behind terrible data retention practices. I mean, the laws, like you said, have been available, but let's just start with data. What's in the data, to your point? You used to ask yourself, would you want your mum to know this? Or would you want this on the front page of the newspaper? And so there's that piece, right? That curious coaching question as to how are we behaving in our daily practices. But you brought up another great point. There are some very legitimate conversations we want to have that shouldn't be accessible to all. So whether it's your sales strategy, something that's privileged and confidential, how are we leveraging the permission structures and who controls those? I've certainly been in organizations where I've seen no structure whatsoever, or somebody would leave and then someone else would get the controls and not know what they're doing and open it up to the whole team. Errors will happen, but we need to be systematic, to your point, about how we prevent those. Enter the role of us as lawyers and compliance professionals, where we can crowdsource risk intelligence on the activities that our employees are involved in, check for vulnerabilities, and then give guidance. Give choice architecture. This is a vulnerability we now have as a company. Here are some pathways to mitigating this, but let's move because the danger is real. And I guess what's AI given us? It's given us speed and scale. You may have gotten away with having something strange in your Slack messages because you would have deleted them at the end of the year or the end of the 7 years or whatever it is, right? But that's not the case anymore. Now anyone can add on a layer of co-pilot, as you said, to see what's out there. So I think it's really a good, sobering moment, and it's good to raise it. It's good for all of us to think, not to be overwhelmed, as you said, but to think and say, okay, what is it we want to be collecting? What data have we got? And not just the scourge of litigation or the front page of the newspaper, but to your point, what do my kids get told at school? Is it kind? Is it true? Is it necessary? These are not ridiculous questions when it comes to the impact it can have if a coworker sees what you've been saying about them, right? That's just as important as any scandal in some respect. Yeah, great point you make. I don't want to take the time, but I think this is, I'm going to say in my ever optimistic manner, a very exciting time for us to think about this, because the future is now here. We do need to, we're faced with the consequences of those lackadaisical practices. Even if the policies are in place, we know there's sometimes a big gap between what we say we do and what's actually being done by our hundreds of thousands of employees. So great point you make, Chrissy. Just wanted to say, I'm excited about what we can do here.
Lisa, are you excited about what we can do here? Or are you frightened?
Well, yeah, yes and no. I'm always a little more, when Hema and I do these things, I'm always a little bit more cynical than she is. It's our thing. I think there's a lot of great opportunity from it. My cynical side says the controls will come after some organization gets incredibly embarrassed by something, because a lot of times we're very concerned about how we're going to be treating third parties and their information. But it's not because, this is not because of bad intent, but it's nobody is really thinking about it, as you said, or sometimes internally or figuring out until something like an embarrassing thing like that's happened, or a CEO's information gets out, or someone senior is talking horribly and everybody hears. The embarrassment level is something. The other thing is, I don't want people to be trying to get around Copilot or other things by using their other ephemeral app like WhatsApp or other things, which we're already trying to discourage, because that's the only way they feel they can trust it as an organization. Because we want to use it, we want to experiment, but let's figure out a way that isn't Copilot or what the companies put out there, because who knows about the controls, and that can cause problems. And my last point is, whether it's data or other things, for better or worse, we have a responsibility to be involved in this because of the revisions to the ECCP. And I think that's going to be helpful for us as well. And also, hopefully, we have people in our organizations who are specializing in the data, the security, the sensitivity, the privacy, and the co-pilot, because there's only so much. We can raise the concerns and we can come up with some practical solutions, or maybe going back to an earlier point, incorporating these things into our tailored or training. But we can't do everything all the time, and we do need to make sure that the resourcing and the experts are there to help us with the nuances of it. Because, like I said, I'm excited, but I'm cynical, but I'm also a little old on these things. So that'll be where I go with that one. So, Karen, what about you?
Yeah, I have a few points. First of all, Christy, I think you hit it right on the head. And when you talked about data governance, which a lot of companies really struggle with, it's a really tough topic, and a lot of it is a little bit maybe too much too late or too little too late. So data governance, applying things like least privilege access, trying to deal with the ephemeral messaging issue, which the SEC has certainly give us a good heads up. ECCP, like you said, Lisa, so there's that whole side of it. There's also, the more things get convenient, sometimes the lazier we get as well. If you're using AI to draft minutes from your meeting, you still need to review them for accuracy, because there's a lot of this hallucination built into AI systems. I mean, I love that hallucination just because I'm a kind of a science fiction fan, and that whole do robots dream of electrified sheep? I don't know. But so you can't be lazy in this application. AI is a tool. It's not the be all end all. And so whatever it's throwing out, you're still accountable for. And kind of on the laziness question, and I am 100% guilty here. We were traveling through Europe this summer, but even here in the US with the different state requirements, I throw away my privacy rights all the time because I'm too lazy to go in and figure out the configuration, right? I just click, yeah, fine, no problem. I'm not going to go in and say, well, you can use this one, but not this one. And is this important or that not important? And I think it's the same thing here when we're on so many different platforms, but at a minimum, an organization, whatever kind of platform that they're using on a regular basis, you've got to get that automatic configuration in there that is taking into consideration the data governance point, and make the default kind of the most restricted. So you're not automatically transcribing, not automatically recording, but as individuals, we also need to exercise that kind of restraint and oversight. I don't know about you, but I'm on probably 5 different platforms during the day talking to different people, and I don't go in. I'm not even sure I've gone into my own Zoom platform to see what the automatic settings are. Yeah, the data governance on one end and the kind of human behavioral element on the other.
This is not going to be an easy fix, but I do think that people are that Washington Post article really opened my eyes and made me think more broadly. Is we're always talking about this radical danger, but the danger is here. It's right here, and it can affect culture and morale in massive ways. I think, Lisa, why don't you round us up? What did you bring?
All right, I am bringing in RTX and Raytheon. They have had a very difficult couple of months. Let's start with the fact that, give you a little bit of background, and then we can talk about why I think it's important right now for us as compliance officers. And this isn't the first settlement. There was an export control settlement in September for $200 million. And there was another $100 million suspended as long as RTX, and that's the successor name for Raytheon. So if I interchange them, that's what's happening. It was suspended as long as RTX will use that for compliance programmatic improvements. They're also hiring a special compliance officer for the export compliance program. I did not get a chance to check on how that hiring is going, but for those sanctions experts out there, you probably will have good resources in this situation. So just a little thought about that. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the settlement that was announced on October 16th with the Department of Justice. And before we get into what's wrong, we can get into something that is eventually going right. After, as the DOJ and others said, the prior leadership at RTX and Raytheon was being difficult and a bit obstreperous, my word, not theirs. New leadership has come in 2022 and have cooperated with the DOJ and is remediating. So they did manage to get some benefit for that, for those of us who think, when will it matter? The leadership change hugely did. So the result of what happened before that is that Raytheon will be paying over $950 million to resolve investigations into 3 categories: government fraud with defective pricing on government contracts, violations, as we all know and love, of the FCPA and the, scarily enough, Arms Export Control Act and its implementing regulations, and the ITAR, International Traffic in Arms regulations. So it was also an even worse day on the 16th because there was an SEC settlement also raised on that day. It came with the same offenses. Let's talk now about what went wrong. And there were a lot of things, but most were in Qatar. The one thing that started is they hired an intermediate was related to the emir and part of the royal family. That individual had no experience in contracting and limited defense. And someone at Raytheon actually wrote their activity reports to help them make them legit and paid them around $30 million. So that was, we can just think about as Qatari relative 1. Now we've got Qatari relative 2. Is a cousin now of the emir. And that person was identified through due diligence as a consultant that had high corruption risks, high concerns. And as they continued the engagement with this individual, they kept giving the person more and more. And eventually there was a really high payment of $17 million in 2020 to exit the relationship, which seems to have aligned with about the time that things were heating up. This person, the country manager, acted as their handler. Employees were asking about the agent. People raised concerns. And then even the country manager, and this part I saw from, and thank you, Matt Kelly, for this quote that I read it like 4 times and had to go fact check it. So this person wrote a complaint about the due diligence questions from the agent and then was asked by a senior executive to draft a reply. So essentially the country manager is now replying to the concerns about the agent that is super dubious. And so the last thing, with all of that background, a couple of practical things, taking it from the over $1 billion in settlements to what do we think about day to day? And the first thing I thought a lot about is, what do you do, or what happens to us when we have business partners who are willing to act or do what is needed when you have a due diligence or a sanctions red flag? If you're refusing I know for a lot of companies, we have different contracts, we do different things, and then we say no. If there's this much concern, that is where you can't rely on the business. Sometimes you allow the business to analyze risk. This one, at that point, you really can't. The second thing about it is that how are we not knowing better? We see these every week, I feel like. How is it that people still seem to look at these growth areas and not either raise the concern or think somehow they can get away with it, or by hiring further through the chain, hiring a third party who can hire a third party, where somehow you can be hands off on it? And I just don't understand why businesses are not seeming to get the lesson with all of these things, because it seems like another week, another thing. And I'm wondering what we can do is, and I do not have an answer to this, but what can we do in our roles to really both emphasize the risks, identify them, and help walk the line between what are our legitimate real concerns on this, and how do we help go into emerging markets and do it in a way where we can address what might be a cultural challenge, but still move forward objectives, which may really be valuable. So those are my answers to no questions, but what I've been thinking about since this Raytheon. So with that, Karen, I'm with you.
Yeah, I just have a small comment, more of a question, and I don't want to doubt RTX's intent here. I'm sure it will be a good one. But if you bring in a chief compliance officer on a one risk basis, it suggests to me that you can isolate a risk and not have to question the entire kind of compliance structure on which the culture sits. So it's really more a question, if you're coming in that position, how do you do that without actually trying to address a much broader issue that is pervasive throughout the organization? So I'm curious to see how that pans out.
Yeah, Lisa, you had lots of questions. I'm not sure answers, but lots of questions. Hema, what say you?
Yeah, no, I'm going to add to the questions. I think Lisa asked exactly the right questions. And Karen, you've hit on something there, this idea that we could be a one risk chief compliance officer or one risk compliance function. is just it's not congruent, right? It doesn't make sense because we know our employees across industries, let alone in one particular organization, are not one activity employees. Lisa, your question about how does the business not get this yet, and also the one before, which is why are they not managing it themselves? I mean, I think that is, you're right. That's the answer. I've always believed, and this is my optimism, I've always believed the answer is the risk owners have to know how to make decisions on a daily basis, and we're there to facilitate that decision-making process, that choice architecture again. Now, again, that's me stating some good intentions. How do we get there? I wonder, Karen, if we only have one chief compliance officer or a small team trying to serve an army of hundreds of thousands, I think in the case of Raytheon, it probably is hundreds of thousands of employees and contractors, aren't we behind the curve there? I mean, isn't there an incongruent message where they're being told to go out and do business, and they think, and probably they're right, they know how business is done better than we do. They're like, yeah, compliance once a year, checkbox. We've got to make money. This is our mandate, and this is what we'll do. We'll check the box with you, but we're not going to be thinking about you as we go forward. And I think that's the gap that we have to bridge. Lisa, again, questions, not answers. This is our life's work.
Yeah, I do have one other thought, though, about the special compliance officer that came in as a result of the State Department. I certainly hope, and my reading of it was that this wasn't supposed to be the person who would be running the program as a whole, but running this one division for export compliance. At least I hope that's the case. And in which case, I think this, if that is true, the State Department asked for exactly what they need as a remedy for their issue, but it should be a larger cultural thing. But I think we should also assume and hope, because if they end up taking that and making that the whole program, then you're right, it's a continuing problem. But if the organization or any organization says, all right, we've identified that we have this huge issue, so we are going to get an expert to help us fix it, and then they're going to work with the 3 or 4 people that are working on it in other areas of ethics and compliance, that could be beneficial as well. But again, I'm not 100% sure I'm right about that, but I think dedicated resources, depending on how you utilize them, are good.
Karen?
It almost feels kind of opposite ends of the scale, where, here in RTX, you've got one person fixing one problem in the organization. And then at Boeing, you've got this, what is probably going to be a huge monitor team trying to fix safety issues while addressing all the compliance programs. I feel like sometimes balances are off, or you're overweighted or underweighted on different things. But the truth is in the pudding. You have to really see how it pans out.
Yeah, I would say that this reminded me a little bit of TD Bank, which I was going to speak about until I got down rabbit holes with Otter AI and all of that. And when they had those fantastic quotes of, wait, isn't this money laundering? And the reply was, oh, it 100% is. I mean, you had that in corporate records that then ended up at literally people said there was $1 million in checks on one day. And the teller says, excuse me, I don't think this is acceptable. And the manager says, yeah, no, it shouldn't be. No. Okay, process those. I mean, you're dealing in a situation where everybody knows it's not okay and nobody is responding to that. So when you get it so blatant, this is like one little complaint that wasn't investigated properly. This is people, there's $1 million checks in this place today. Maybe there's a problem. So yeah, I think that this is kind of related to that, where people just said, it's fine. Not a great outcome. All right, we have come to fan favorite, everyone's fan favorite, which is rants and raves. Who wants to rant? Who wants to rave? We will find out now. Karen, you are up first.
All right, I am going to rave in an unusual direction, and I hope this doesn't somehow jinx you, Christy, on your travel home. But I'm going to rant. I'm going to rave. Usually it's a rave about United Airlines and the way that they have created transparency within the travel experience recently. Today, I put my husband on a flight. And because I am the family travel agent, because I always second guess everybody else doing it, so I landed with it. So because of that, I got all the notifications, and there was like a Swiss level communication on, we are so sorry, it is going to be 10 minutes late because of technical issues that we have solved, which is going to result in a 4-minute late arrival in your destination. Here's where you can track your luggage and make sure that your bag has made it on the plane, so you can rest easy. Here is the credit card that you have put on so you can do contactless purchases of all sorts of unhealthy snacks on the plane. So I have a lot to complain about in all the massive amount of travel and the things that go wrong that I've experienced. But I really think that this is a good faith effort. It's a really good sign for transparency and communication, which calms me right down when I know what's going on. Yeah, my rave is to United Airlines and their communications.
I love that. I gotta tell you, knowing I fly United, I fly American, I fly everywhere. But United's, hey, your bag is here, your bag is coming, your bag. You don't sit there going, please, please let my bag be here. It is the most nice thing to be like, it's here, we're fine.
Stand at that baggage carousel until the absolute last thing has come off and then realize your thing didn't make it onto the plane.
That's exactly the point where I'm sitting there going, please. So yeah, shout out to them. Also, shout out to other airlines. Get this feature. All right, Hema, what do you want to rant or rave about?
Let me rant. I've been way too positive. Let me rant about something. And this is inspired by what you'd said earlier, Christy, about the prevalence of AI tools and eyes everywhere. My rant is about the rush to write AI policies that are very prescriptive and exhaustive lists of approved uses, approved tools. Only because we have to be very realistic about this way that we tend to approach these things. Just come to us and we'll approve it and we'll investigate it. I don't think we're going to be fast enough for the way that technology is evolving. And so I remember the first policy that I wrote and co-authored did say only use this one thing that we've approved that's proprietary. And within seconds, it was out of date because every application that I'm using now has some kind of AI. And so I think we need to think a bit more about principle-based versus rule-based policies when it comes to AI. And so my rant is against the rules-based and towards the principle-based. I think we're going to do a lot better if we can help our employees think about what the risks are and then talk about what the appropriate uses. It's not a ban of a particular tool, it's the way you use it. So for example, don't put proprietary information into a tool that's not closed. That's one example. Ask permissions before you record, or to your point, let's ask for access uses for certain things for recording. But as long as we're more principle-based versus rules-based, I think we'll get out of our own way as compliance professionals. So that's my rant for the day. Don't put too much rules-based when it comes to approved lists of exhaustive lists. Make sure we're thinking and keeping up with the times so we don't make ourselves irrelevant and therefore ignored.
I like it. Also, note to Congress and things like that. The minute you try to tell me exactly what I can use or not use, it's already done once you print the paper. So I'm going to rant for a moment. First of all, rave, well done, Dodgers, California girl, yay, good job. Okay, don't want to make all the New Yorkers mad because I haven't left New York yet. But in terms of,
remember they started in Brooklyn, so it is a New York win.
So I am going to rant because I went to one of my very favorite stores, Williams-Sonoma, a week and a bit ago, and I'm in there and they've got the little Halloween barks and everything. And what did I hear? Christmas music. No Christmas music before Halloween. We've all accepted the whole Thanksgiving thing, and that's fine. But Halloween, people, I understand this is your big season. Williams-Sonoma is one of my favorite places to go for Christmas, but most of the Christmas things weren't even out yet, only the Thanksgiving, and they had this like whole section for Halloween, and I'm hearing it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas, and I'm like, it is not, and it should not. So that's what I have to say about that. Keep some boundaries, people. That's what we want. Lisa.
My tree's going up today. My tree's going up today. It's after Halloween.
Today is fine. That's what I'm saying. Dia de los Muertos, we're on, but not before Halloween. It's abomination. All right, Lisa.
Point about Christmas. I've modified from not till Thanksgiving to listen to the Christmas music channels. I do have something I'm very proud of as my Spotify holiday. It's mostly Christmas list. I will tell you, I mean, in terms of any religion or any person, as a Jewish person, I love, it's on the highlights for me to be putting together my Christmas music things, but I will not start until I went 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, but I can't do it further. So I agree with you. Now I have since I'm going last, I'm going to do a quick rant and a quick rave because I had both. My rant is, as we are getting to the end of the year and people have sales quotas and other things, recent vendor outreach that I've gotten through LinkedIn and through work is really starting to aggravate me. And I mean it in the most polite way. I'm not somebody who goes out and crusades this, but I've had people recently link into me and then introduce me to their friend, who's another person they work with, to try to get time to sell a product. I have people all the time sending me and introducing things that have zero to do with what I do for a living. So what I'm saying is, and somebody once who did that, and I recently wrote back to yet another person, like, I'm debating whether to be polite anymore, because I basically said, look, if you looked at this, I don't do anything in, I can't remember. I mean, it was like an information security certification. They're like, oh, great, thanks, sir. Can you refer me to who does? It's so good to know you. And it's maybe be a little strategic because I think your return on investment might be a little better. So that's my rant, especially as they hit Q4 recommendation. My rave is sports related and very quick. It's my Buffalo Bills. I don't know how the rest of the season will go. I don't know. But at the end of the year, this summer, 2 people on their defense got injured. The offensive superstar of the team left. Everybody out there was like, they're not going to win their division this year. They crashed. And the coaches basically said, you know what, we have a team. We believe in it. We believe in this process. And I don't know if that's true, but somehow this year they seem to have brought new people in, lost a lot, really were resilient. And now they have the same number of wins as the whole rest of their division. 2 of the 3 teams were supposed to be dethroning them next week. I think there's something to be said sometimes for teamwork and kind of being that low profile until you're not thing. And look, this may not age well by the time this comes out. We may be on something, and I'm hoping not to jinx that. But I just think it reminds me, I think it's a really good story. So that's my rave. Teamwork and go Bills.
I love it. Karen, I saw in the chat, you said that's your team too, Buffalo. Emma, do you have a team?
No.
I'm a Let's Go Steelers. I'm a Let's Go Steelers girl myself, but Buffalo is a close second since I went to high school in upstate New York. There we
I'm
are.
all about the Rust Belt teams, but at Hema, the Bills bandwagon is always open to everybody.
I will check
and
that.
the listeners.
All right, from Steeler Nation. Okay, thank you everybody for joining us on the Everything Compliance podcast. I hope you had as much fun as I did. Christy Grant Hart, joined by Hema Lomax, Lisa Fine, Karen Moore. Until next time, take care and have a great holiday season. Thanks. Okay, I imagine they'll cut there. Great job, everybody. I hope you had as much fun as I did.
Sorry that the minute that I
Absolutely.
started talking, like a truck came in the background, but hopefully they can close it out. I don't know if you heard it, but I was like, now?
No, I thought it was great.
And now somebody's been trying to join on and off throughout and wants to say hi.
Oh,
no.
I held him back from the actual recording just as a debate, but
Yeah, I guess people who are listening to it wouldn't be able to see it, but anybody watching on video, very, very happy.
yes.
I know. I just, as a guest, I
So
figured.
cute.
So.
All right, good. Okay, thank you, everybody. Is there anything else?
Safe travels, Christy.
No, we got
Thank
you out in
so much.
time. It's so great to see you all.
I
And
got
Karen,
20
I'm
extra
writing you
minutes.
separately.
Freaking golden. Thank you, everybody.
All right,
Okay,
take care.
see you
Bye.
later.
Well done.
Bye.